Welcome to Admin House Education on March 24th, 2026. First meeting of the committee for a new week. Some housekeeping. We have as much dispensation as can be given to a committee to not be on the floor. That is with hopes that we can move forward. We're going to look at some new language that I worked with legislative counsel on, and no surprises from what I sort of may have previewed last week. But just to sort of bring us sort of where we are. We have been spinning our wheels for a while, unable to sort of come together around one thing or another. So this, what I have presented is what I talked about last week. It's actually not all that dissimilar to sort of the path that the Senate Education Committee has been discussing as well. And, you know, I would say probably it's reflective of what we heard from the redistricting task force. So what we're going to look at is sort of voluntary, a path down voluntary mergers, however, with mandatory discussions required. The idea here is to sort of say, all right, based on something, I will just sort of throw out there based on my map as a way to divide up, and then I'd like the committee to we'll work on that stuff at a certain point. The idea here is that well, two things: mandatory discussions about mergers, not mandatory mergers, and CESA districts laid out with the creation of CESAs. The two hopefully should be able to interact in that. One thing we want to do is have facilitators out there juicing these discussions about merging. We can potentially use CESAs as territories for those facilitators, while we are also creating CESAs, which we seem to be good around. We then are able to use existing statute, Chapter 11 of Title 16, because it lays out a process that's all there. All the work has been done. It's not creating anything from scratch. And so we can really take advantage of that. There's still a lot to discuss, obviously. Would you say that I certainly know that we're not getting a unanimous vote on anything out of this committee, unlike what we have been doing, which has been fabulous. But, you know, what we need is, you know, but I guess I have been recognizing both this committee and the body as a whole, regardless of party, a certain, concern about mandating newer, larger districts, whether it's doesn't matter what party you are, going back home and saying, I support us being forced into a newer, larger district. It's been expressed to me, makes people uncomfortable. This goes towards a voluntary way of doing this. And it doesn't force us to reinvent the law. We've got a process all laid out. It keeps Vermonters in charge of their destinies in many ways, which has been expressed as well, that is a major concern of people from all walks of life. But I will say it doesn't answer a lot of other questions. Anyway, so that's what the language that I have been vamping while it gets posted is all about. So this is draft 3.1.
Oh, please.
We'll need to refresh.
Refresh. Sounds like she's frustrated.
I just bumped it. All the things in this chair. All right, let's take a journey through this.
St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. So draft 3.1, I put a little key up at the top there, and then there is some outstanding policy decisions that I didn't highlight for you, which are mainly just around who belongs to what seesaw. But there is green and yellow through what we're going to talk about today. So the only changes I made to the Cooperative Educational Service Areas Enabling Law, which is Chapter 10 law, is on page 7, line 5. This is section 604, powers of seesaws. So previously this read, provide services in the following areas, and we've changed that to offer services in the following areas. That's the only change since draft 2.1.
Just the significance of that is, if we mandate a CISA provide a certain, it is a way to reflect not every district needs the same services from a CISA.
And we're going to jump. So we're not touching the rest of this is the seesaw change language, and then some of the substantive changes that we made in the last draft you looked at to the types of services seesaws are offering. And then you have not made any final policy decisions on who belongs to what seesaw yet. That is something that will need to be fleshed out, and I will make sure is in green for the next draft so we don't forget it. But we're going to jump to page 19. Actually, sorry, page 20. We're going to jump to page 20. In the next reader assistance heading, which is Union School District Exploration and Formation. So we walked through some of this language last week, but most of what we're going to walk through now is in yellow and green because it's new. So the overall concept has not changed. Seesaws are required to employ not, oh, do you want me to share my screen?
I'm sorry, I was reading it.
Sorry, I was just going without sharing. Do you want me to share?
Yeah, let's go.
Okay. Okay. So the requirement for each seesaw to have a facilitator, at least one facilitator, who is responsible for organizing and facilitating study committees to study the advisability of forming a union school district, that has not changed. The concept that the facilitator is grouping school districts into those supervisory unions has also not changed, but we've added some further detail. So the first thing we've added also involves a policy decision, and that is on or before blank, each facilitator shall group school districts within the seesaw's member supervisory unions together to form study committees to study the advisability of forming a union school district. When do you want that drop dead date to be, right? It's just an open policy question for you. If you don't have to put a date in there. If you don't put a date in there, then you leave it up to the facilitators to determine for themselves on what timeline they are working. So staying on page 20, line 14, this is new language, also involves a policy choice. Using the suggested school district groupings contained in section X, I have put in parentheses there the Conlin map. As guidance, the facilitator shall group school districts together according to the following criteria. Do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to talk about that?
I'd be happy to talk about it. So the average, we talked about 4,000 students. I guess one of the concerns is that if we shoot high, we're going to miss the low-hanging fruit of smaller districts coming together. I guess just could see a former study committee. And if you're going, I wanted to, those of us who were discussing this, the idea is to allow for more flexibility into who comes together in a voluntary merger situation. I think part of the concern was if you say 4,000 and you get a group of people coming together and they're like, we don't want 4,000, then the whole thing falls apart. What we're trying to do is encourage this to happen. So hence the greater flexibility.
Do you want to speak to the Conlon map reference, or would you?
Yes, I'll speak to that as well. When we're done talking here, I do have a piece of paper with lines on it that is for everybody to kind of look at and help me redraw the line. So what it is the map that I put on the table, which did break up districts into 2,000 to 4,000, overlaid with the current recommendation from the redistricting task force, which I think was the VSA regions. They need those lines also need work. As you'll see that some of those are chopping some of my significant school districts into pieces, some areas, and there's only 5 of them, and I think 5 is too few. So I made a piece of paper. For once, you can look and say, you know something, I think this should be here. I think Chittenden County should be divided into a greater number of CISAs or whatever. And I would shoot for a goal of 7. So it's a worksheet for everybody to take a look at.
So eventually, because we're not attaching a map to whatever bill you pass, we'll have to spell out in a section what the map says, right? We'll have to put it into legislative language. So there will be a section. So if you choose to stick with this language on lines 14 and 15 that require the facilitators to use that map as guidance for their groupings, we'll have to put all of that into legislative language in a section for reference, which is why it's green. Okay, so the facilitator shall group school districts together according to the following criteria. We've just talked about that we've moved from the last draft from approximately 4,000 to between 2,000 and 4,000 ADM as practical. Have not changed a requirement that the school districts are required to be contiguous. And have not changed the fact that school districts on the same study committee may be members of different supervisory unions. We have not changed the language that requires a school district to participate in the study committee it is assigned to. And we have not changed the requirement that the study committee is required to follow chapter 11, subchapter 2. What comes after subdivision 3 in all of subdivision 3's parts are some either more specific direction related to what's the process that's already in chapter 11, or exceptions to, or deviations from. So subdivision A, we're keeping the same. In the interest of time, I'm just gonna jump right to the new language. Subdivision B is new language for you all today regarding study committee budgets. So current law in chapter 11, in those sections that I have referenced here or not withstood, talks about study committee budgets and that the budgets are apportioned to school districts based essentially on their ADM. I think the title, or I think the chapter uses outdated language of equalized pupils. And then it talks about if the budget is anticipated to be $50,000 or greater, you have to get approval from the electorate for that budget. If it's less than 50,000, you don't need the approval of the electorate. And if you think it's less than 50,000, you keep going and you realize it needs to be more than 50,000, then you have to go to the electorate. So what subdivision B says is, notwithstanding those provisions of law, the study committee formed pursuant to this section shall be funded through appropriations made by the General Assembly for this purpose, which you have not done yet. Provided, however, that if a study committee's needs exceed the appropriations provided, it may elect to increase its budget according to the processes and procedures of current law.
Yeah.
So does that all add up to General Assembly somewhere we're gonna find the money up to 50?
Yeah, that's no, you can give them however much money you want.
But if you go above whatever,
But this is
It's given.
policy choice. Right now, the
Then
law
it's-
says it's a vote of
right,
the districts in that committee.
So I think depending on the appropriation you give them, I will amend this language accordingly for when I don't know that we need to, because it's just they would just follow current law. So if you give them 25 grand and they think they need an extra 25 grand from their own coffers, then they would not, under current law, need to go to the electorate because it's less than 50,000. If you give them $10,000 and they decide that their budget should be $60,000, then they would probably need to go to the electorate because 50,000 hits the vote requirement. So ultimately, this language may need to be adjusted depending on whether you keep the concept of making a separate appropriation and how much that separate appropriation is. You're slightly dealing with the unknown because you are leaving it up to the facilitator's discretion. So you will not have any guarantee of how many study committees are actually formed.
And related to that, so I'm trying to process all of this and the requirements. But at the very top about the facilitator, study committees, on or before blah, blah, blah date, each facilitator shall group school districts within the CISA's member supervisory unions together, form study committee. That leaves an awful lot of decision-making on a person that is an employee of the CISA. And I'm curious about whether there's any language below this that we haven't reached where if a district or an SU said, I don't want to be a part of this study committee, I want to be a part of a different one or whatever. Is there any process to deal with that?
Yes, it's not quite as generous as just I don't want to, but there is.
I don't want to.
No, I know. It still comes back to the facilitator.
Okay, but there's a process.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, yes, we'll get there. I'll
Okay.
point out what I think the process is.
I was waiting to say it, but then just the words just opened up. I just wanted to make sure that it feels very much at this point in time that the facilitator has a huge amount of responsibility here and will be a target, and we need to make sure that we've done. Thank you. I will wait.
You have added, though, that language about using the map as guidance.
Got it.
So that is an additional level of direction to the facilitator that you didn't have in the last. But yes, that concept is addressed. Okay, so we just talked about budgets. Subdivision C is about regional, middle or high schools or both. That language remains unchanged from draft 2.1. And then pretty much everything else is new. So I'm on page 22, line 5.
Like to introduce this language as this is really just for conversation. It is not there to say this is the direction we're going in. I just want to get this sort of be thinking about this. And it's part of it is really based on the recommendation of the Commission on Future Public Education.
If a study committee determines it is advisable to form a new union school district, the proposed articles of agreement prepared by the study committee shall prohibit the new union school district from closing a school unless it obtains the approval of the electorate of the town or city in which the school is physically located for the first 3 fiscal years of the new school district's operation. I have not included any language in here about grade reconfiguration and what school closure means. Should you choose to pursue this concept, I think that is some language that we would need to explore depending on your goals. Line 10, the articles of agreement shall further provide that after the first 3 fiscal years, the new union school district shall be prohibited from closing a school unless it first obtains the approval of the electorate of the union school district.
So sorry, I'm just wondering if a school exists but serves more than one town, that it is, if it's physically in a town that serves more than one town, does the town that it's physically in have the sole right to go on it closing?
I think it's a great question, and we probably would need to adjust the language to say the town said operated.
Okay, all right.
If we choose to go down this path. The other choice is to just say we're we're not gonna exercise any control over articles of agreement.
So if the town or city decides not to close the school, stays as it is for 3 years.
Yeah.
Then at the 3-year mark, it triggers the supervisor or the union school district will then put it to a vote of the entire union school district electorate to decide if they want to close the school. So it no longer is in the town's hands, it's in all of the town's hands.
Well, it seems like that's just possibly a 3-year reprieve for some of the small schools that might not want to close versus a.
Part of the idea is to give a newer, larger district the opportunity to operate and get to know one another first.
Right, but suppose there still is like one school that doesn't really want to be a part of it after 3 years, someone else, like the rest of the district might vote to close them because they're too expensive.
There is no requirement that anybody be part of a newly merged district.
Okay. Right.
Next, new subdivision. If a study committee formed pursuant to this section determines that so let me back up. If a study committee determines that it is advisable to form a union school district, then they have to write a report and new proposed articles of agreement, and those are the work product that continue on the journey and are eventually voted on. Under current law, if a study committee determines that it is inadvisable to form a new union school district, they don't have to give anyone anything. The study committee themselves would vote to disband. This is adding a requirement that if a study committee formed pursuant to this section determines that it is inadvisable to propose formation of a new union school district, then before the study committee members vote to dissolve the study committee, the study committee is required to prepare a report with the following details. What those details are completely a policy choice. So consider this just a starting place. So the names of the school districts participating in the study committee and whether participation was formal or informal. An analysis of the strengths and challenges of the current structures of all necessary and advisable school districts. That is language that is required, that is in Chapter 11. And that is the analysis that is required of a study committee that determines it is advisable. So we're just asking for the same analysis when it is determined to be inadvisable to form a new school district. The reasons why formation of a new union school district would be inadvisable, with specific references to any state law or rule the study committee found to be an impediment to the formation of a union school district, with a specific analysis of why such rule or law was an impediment. And if the decision of the study committee was not unanimous, an analysis of the minority view of the committee outlining the ways in which a union school district promotes the state policy set forth in section 701 of this chapter. So what I was trying to get at here, and does not have to be where you land, is if it's not a unanimous decision, well, who thought it was a good idea and why did they think it was a good idea? So you can see both sides of the argument. The study committee is required to transmit the report to the school board of each school district that participated in the study committee, the Secretary of Education, the State Board of Education, and the facilitator or facilitators assisting the study committee. You could certainly add yourselves in there, but we're going to have a separate section that requires the facilitator to make a report back to you all. So I was thinking maybe there could be, they could aggregate all of that information in one report, but there's certainly nothing stopping you from having those reports come to you, or even made an addendum to the facilitator's report, et cetera. Anything before I move on to a completely new section in the bill? Did I miss anything here? Okay.
Right to the top of this section.
Yep.
The facilitator is employed by the CSA.
Correct.
So this is an issue that needs to be probably fleshed out a little further, because the goal here,
Yeah.
the goal here would be is we want to get facilitators on the ground doing this work immediately. CSAs are going to take a while to kick on.
Right.
So we are exploring options that might allow us to have facilitators doing this work before the CSAs are formed. But they would do this work based on the CSA orders.
So we're talking about hiring contractors, right? Like these are envisioned as permanent, ongoing, multi-year facilitators.
Okay. So we're moving on to a new section. And this is based, it should be green really. Page 23, section 13, guidance for study committee groupings. This is where I envision the legislative language that describes the map that you are asking the facilitators to use as guidance lives. So facilitators shall use the school district groupings contained in subdivisions 1 through X of this section as guidance when forming study committees pursuant to section 12. Facilitators may form study committees that differ from the guidance contained in this section, provided, however, that a facilitator shall include their rationale for such choices in the report required pursuant to subsection B of section 15. Whether you want to allow this discretion is completely up to you. I think if you don't want to allow any discretion, then we have some conforming changes to make further up in section 12 related to whether the facilitator is using the map as guidance or the facilitator is making groupings as determined by the map. So this is all, this should be green, section 1. So this would be where we list out, and you're going to have some policy choices on what you call these groupings. It could just be you don't call them anything. You just say, you just list towns in each, or list school districts and their member towns within each division. Section 14, and I can already see this should be on mine too. This should be section 14, not section 15. Facilitator reports. Impact, influence, and recommendations on or before X. So when are you envisioning this work will be not done, but done enough that you can get a report back on it? Shall submit a written report to the House and Senate committees on education with information regarding whether, and if so, how the following issues impacted or influenced the final outcome for each study committee overseen by the facilitator. And maybe what we do is we do a tiered, maybe it's an annual report for a certain number of years. Or by, a quarterly report for a certain, for two, we'll have to get creative about when you think you would be getting information back. Along with recommendations for legislative action needed to remove identified barriers to the formation of new union school districts. So again, this is all policy. Differences in staffing costs and the costs associated with moving from several different collectively bargained agreements to one collectively bargained agreement for applicable staff in the new union school district. I believe. Differences in operating structures, geographic and topographic barriers, enrollment patterns and projections, and my favorite, any other factor the facilitator found to have influenced the final decision of a study committee. Supervisory union and seesaw boundaries. On or before a certain date, each facilitator employed by a seesaw shall submit a written report to the education committees with recommendations for SU boundary adjustments and seesaw boundary adjustments that take into account the new union school districts formed or proposed to be formed pursuant to this act. Facilitators may include recommendations pursuant to this subsection B in the report that we just walked through, but they can also submit a separate report. Funding is just a big old green highlight there. I've added no language.
Does that have to be solved?
That's a policy choice.
I think that's another committee's.
Effective date should really be green as well.
Clarifying questions? Yes.
Sorry. So with this language, once a new union school district's formed and operating their own schools, most current tuitioning towns and districts will disappear. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, ask that again?
So once a new union school district forms and is operating their own schools, does that mean most tuitioning towns and districts will disappear?
Oh, I have no idea.
Because if they're operating, you know, if you operate a new district and you have a high school and they're K through 12, in that case, they cannot tuition out
I cannot guess as to the decisions.
based on current law.
I cannot, my answer is my answer.
So-
I cannot.
I will endeavor to answer that. It all depends on what these study groups decide among themselves for how they'd like to operate.
No idea.
So they may say, you know, something we don't feel we can operate as a school district because we have both a, you know, a non-operating and operating in the same district. They write a report that says that. And so they just continue on like as usual. Or they may get together and say, hey, we feel we can operate this district at a larger scale with an independent school and public schools, perhaps using all of the language that Chris put on the table the other day. But that would be a decision within the district to make as part of their articles of agreement.
And that brings me to like subsection E on page 22. It feels like it's about setting up districts to have to blame tuitioning and choice in writing when districts with choice don't want to merge. It feels like it's trying to lay blame.
No, I think it is really all about self-determination, and this is all voluntary. And you know, what I was trying to get here is something that frankly doesn't go to the whole independent school battle. This just says, want to do it or not do it.
But it's not even.
And if you don't want to do it, that's allowed here. There are other areas that operate no independent schools or have no access to them that may want to stay just.
You're bringing the conversation to independent schools. There is quite a few students in these tuitioning towns that send their kids to public schools.
Yeah.
So, right, like it's not about independent schools. It's about tuitioning in general.
Yeah, it's about the town tuition program. This doesn't change any of that.
But it forces the direction. And if they go in that direction, I mean, it really does try and leverage the direction, them districts to merge into unified school districts.
I would not agree with that at all. I would say it is bringing groups of people together on a larger scale to see if moving to a larger scale is something that they want to do. And if they don't, they don't. Yeah, it's purely voluntary. If this group of people chooses their own destiny in a certain way, that's fine. But again, not everybody has to go along with it.
So I'm trying to, I know we got the 2,000 to 4,000, we're trying to have some boundaries around all of this, and we've got the on map, reading off of here, not anything else.
Yeah.
I've
accepted it.
Yeah, I know. I'm just acknowledging. Is there a possibility that when facilitator is grouping school districts with the CSA's membership, if they wanted to, let me just say, for example, I want the whole county to be a part of one study committee because so I'm just saying the school districts. It's facilitator is putting school districts together.
Yep.
And they have a difficulty about, well, wait a minute, I want to be with this one, I want to be with that one, you know, there's a lot of that going on. And could they make it larger, I guess, is what I'm asking. The facilitator could create, you know, beyond 2 to 4
Oh, I see what you're saying.
study committees.
Oh,
I think this language says 2,000, 4,000 as practical, and you don't have guidance for the facilitator to stray from that. You have all seen that no matter how much effort you put into words, like we can't control human behavior. So I would say this does not allow for deviation from that.
Okay.
Or the discretion to deviate from that. Now, whether the facilitator is going to say like nothing's going to work unless I deviated, and so I thought something was better than nothing, you know, I don't know what you're going to get. But I would say the language on page 20, lines 18 through 19
Yeah, looking at it.
does not have any discretion built into it,
So
except
let's-
as practical.
I was
Except
gonna
as
say,
Keep that in mind, because I think
Yeah.
actually that
I mean,
Maybe I'll have
I
large
literally
groups.
know that there are areas that are, after seeing the original Conlon map and then looking at maps in the Senate, there are areas we're struggling with, well, do I want to go in that direction or want to go in this direction? And a study committee might be able to facilitate that conversation in a way that is a little more helpful if it was brought up. That's all,
certainly
that's
would
all I'm
want to
saying.
limit.
I totally understand all the barriers to having it gigantic, okay, but I'm just wondering whether we want to make sure that we're allowed some of that.
All right, let's remember that as we continue on.
if I could clarify what you're saying.
Yeah.
So you're saying the study committee could almost like have groups within the study committee. It's like discussing which way they want to go. Is that what you're saying?
No,
So
not
the- so
really,
it
I
might go
guess
beyond?
I mean, it might end up being that way.
Right, but it would
you know,
be
in the final
larger
report.
than that's envisioned because they might be having those conversations where I don't know if I want to go this way or this way. We're all in the study committee together and throughout our conversation, that decision is made to go this way or to go this way or
Yeah,
either.
I mean, there's a final report that
Yeah.
may not include the whole, like,
Right.
will unlikely conclude the whole
Okay.
study committee, right? Just
Yeah.
saying how big can a study committee? And it'd be effective.
Or like you said, you don't want it to be too big to not be effective, but maybe larger than that might make sense in some cases.
So before we break for lunch, so my motivation here, I've explained to all of you already, just to say, I'm looking for something that we can feel like that enough of us can get behind. It is also to recognize, I gotta tell you, my thinking and ideas have been evolving as we continue to take testimony. I have now sort of become quite concerned about leveling up and what that can cost. And we certainly had that supported in the testimony we heard last week. If we, sort of willy-nilly impose newer, larger districts, I think that is probably an issue best, as are many of the issues of geography and all of that, probably best discussed locally by people who have a better feeling of what's going on the ground. They're going to know what these are areas where superintendents are already working together. These are areas where there are informal conversations going on already. This does not make us sort of reinvent the wheel. It's a process that we've been through once before because it's basically Act 46. No matter what path we go down, it's all complicated. Yes, I originally said let's go to 27 newer, larger districts. That's easy to say, but when you get right down to, okay, how do you make all of that happen in people who are feeling like they're being forced, just down to like the human beings that have to make it all happen, I just find very challenging as a concept to make happen. So hence a more familiar process, a process that has statute governing most of the processes already. One that I think reflects what a lot of Vermonters have been telling us too. So that's what's here. It needs work. The clock ticking behind us is really loud right now, and we're going to be having to work on this path, assuming enough people here are still on board. And those of you who are like, this is not what I envisioned, I hope that you will still help us make this as best a proposal as it can be. But anyway, that's why I have what's here. While we're on the record, so I do have, this is not a map I'm proposing, this is a worksheet for the committee,
It's not a VMAP.
which is, has the districts as I created them and then overlaid with the superintendent's areas. Crayon, magic marker, whatever.
Date sheet.
I would say that how things are divided need a little work. Like I'm looking at going, well, if we're gonna not have a CISA that goes from the Canadian border to Brandon, maybe you should go from Brandon to South Burlington. So anyway, I'm gonna hand these out just for everybody to draw on and come back with some suggestions at some point. But the Senate is kind of on the same path that we are in terms of the bigger concepts of voluntary mergers. Theirs is a little more, I think, a little more prescriptive, but still makes use of Chapter 11. I don't quite have a full understanding of what it, but they have a map as well. They also have, if you don't get to a certain point by a certain time, certain action takes place. I don't know what that is or how it all works, but just to sort of like the differences. Ours is really just the Act 46 process, actually short of, however, Act 46 also said, if you don't do it, state board's going to do it for you. Just stop short of that. I just been talking with a lot of people about school construction as well. It's kind of the same, one of the same issues. And, if we don't continue to have sort of self-governing districts, how do you do debt? How do you do bonding? These things. So I'm trying to sort of work within the known that we have, as opposed to venturing off into the unknown, which I think there's questions of capacity, not just at the AOE, which we often wonder about, but also just capacities of districts being able to do this in a sort of forced way. So just to say, do I sound different than I sounded previously? I do. A lot of it is just from thinking. A lot of it is political reality, and me wanting us to do what we need to do. That we will,
Should we be expecting any additional sections or language over the next coming days?
Yes, I mean, we're going to have to.
Other than what we're discussing here, like in changes, but I mean, is there anything else that's coming our way that we don't know about?
Nothing that has been written or prepared, and nothing that probably won't come from discussions
Okay,
here.
that's more of it. Thank you.
All right, I'll hand these out. And around to us.
Are we restarting?
Okay, so the House is on recess until 1. Why don't we be on recess until 1?